Doing something fun on Laney's channel.
I like that. Is that weird?
That was my bra strap in case any of you pedophiles were wondering.
This video's gonna get me in trouble.
Yes.
You may well feel that the word Onision does not belong in the same sentence as the word philosophy. But setting that prejudice aside, in this video, we're going to talk philosophically about Onision, and we're going to use the anecdotes from the life of Onision here on the internet to talk about ethical philosophy a little bit. I'm going to start with a shout out to another YouTuber. Ask yourself's view of the world is that he says there's a spectrum of values, and at one end of the spectrum, the consequences of our actions are so high that we think about ethics in terms of consequentialism. And then as we move towards the opposite end of the spectrum, we think in terms of deontology, rules-based ethics, what you ought and ought not to do regardless of the consequences. So he may say, if you're in a hypothetical scenario where you could murder one person in order to save the lives of 1 million people, then in that situation you're thinking in terms of consequentialist ethics and ultimately a kind of utilitarian ethics. You think, well, the value of this one person's life seems trivial compared to the 1 million people's lives, you're going to say. Now, I value the illustrations he brings to our discussions of philosophy, but I don't really feel that that is the spectrum these things lie along. My suspicion is that the spectrum is at the one end the hypothetical and abstract, and at the other the real, the everyday, and the concrete. So yes, hypothetically, in the abstract, we could talk about a science fiction scenario where somebody can find the cure for a terrible disease, but they have to just torture one person to death in a horrible scientific experiment in a laboratory in order to produce this cure that will then instantly cure 1 million people who otherwise will instantly die. But in the real world, that's never the kind of scenario we deal with. We deal with a much more complex situation in which the outcome of an experiment is by definition unknown. Some people think this is going to find a cure. Some people think the experiment is not going to be that valuable. Some people think the results of this experiment are going to be rendered moot and obsolete by a different research team in Sweden who's working on a different approach to the same disease. And the reality is, 1 million people have this disease, but, when you get into the nitty-gritty of any real-world problem, any real-world scenario, one crucial difference that comes up again and again is knowing the consequences of your actions, knowing the outcomes. Those hypothetical scenarios where consequentialism seems to make sense, where utilitarian approaches to ethics seem to make sense, they all rely on us being able to know the consequences, the outcomes of our decisions, of our actions. And that's exactly what we can't know. Not even in our most intimate relationships with our boyfriends, our girlfriends, our loved ones. On this spectrum, let's say one person starts off with the principle, deontological principle, that it's completely immoral for a 30-year-old man to be in a sexual relationship with a 19-year-old girl. Sorry, I should take gender out of it. Any combination of genders, that it's also immoral for a 30-year-old woman to be in a relationship with a 19-year-old male, either which way. Someone begins with that as a general principle or rule. And then you have a counter-argument hypothetically, you say, well, what if the 19-year-old partner in this age gap relationship, what if the 19-year-old became a porn star at age 18, and they are in fact so sexually experienced, they've now slept with over 100 people, that it seems reasonable for that 30-year-old to assume that for them to sleep with just one more person is not going to have any great impact. So the question here is being posed in terms of the consequences, the harm done. So the point being here implicitly, you might have one 19-year-old who's very emotionally susceptible, very weak, very tender, very easily upset, very easily hurt, very inexperienced, so on and so forth. And then you might have another 19-year-old who is far more experienced and self-confident and robust, and where it seems reasonable to assume that this love affair is not going to significantly change their lives, reshape how they feel, or have these kinds of profound long-term impacts. Okay? When you're talking about it hypothetically, like the science fiction novel in which they just have to kill one person to save the lives of 1 million, it's easy to set those things up. And when you talk about it in real life, at the other end of the spectrum, the end of the spectrum where we're dealing with deontology, the real difference for me is precisely that we're in a situation of not knowing. You don't know these outcomes. You don't know the outcomes if the government decides to torture someone to try to find out secret information. Do they really know it? Are they going to give you false information? There are all these problems surrounding what's unknowable with the use of torture. All right, there are all these problems that are unknowable with the medical science experiment, finding a cure, so on and so forth. But even if you're dating a 19-year-old veteran of the porn industry, you may imagine that their prior experience makes them immune to falling in love. And you may be wrong. And you know what? Switch it around and look at it from the 19-year-old's perspective. Maybe the 19-year-old goes into this relationship with a 30-year-old, again, either gender, younger male, older female, or vice versa. Maybe the 19-year-old goes into the relationship with the older person and thinks, hey, this man or this woman is over 30, lots of experiences in life. This older person isn't going to fall in love with me. They're not going to go crazy. They're not going to become my stalker. This isn't going to have any kind of lasting or profound impact on them. And you don't know. That 19-year-old might be thinking, this older partner, they must just be immune to falling in love. They must be immune to all the madness that can come, from the human heart. All right? And you don't know. We enter into even the most intimate relationships in our lives as a sort of experiment. And we find out who the other person is through the experiment of falling in love with them and them falling in love with us. And the scariest part of all is they may find out who they really are through the process of falling in love with us. We may find out some things about who we really are through the process of falling in love with that. Okay? The relationship can reveal not just who that person is to us, but who we are to ourselves. So the role of the unknown brings us back again and again to a more deontological approach to ethics, a more rule-based set of ethics. Because the rules can remain true, they can remain useful, even in a situation where what we struggle with is not even so much our own morality or immorality, is not even so much our own implacable desires. It may be that part of what we're struggling with is that we can't know the consequences of our actions. We can't know how much we're going to hurt someone else. We can't know how much we're going to destroy their life, even if we go into the relationship with the best intentions possible. Many of the critics of Onision and his sex life are saying things that are untrue. Jacqueline Glenn was stating it as if it's a proven fact that Onision has broken the law. There is no law he's broken in his current relationship fiasco. So I don't think he's going to take her to court for saying that, but it's not true. If anything, Onision has shown he has a fetish for obeying the letter of the law, which is a little bit disturbing on many other levels. But in all of his relationships, what Onision refuses to do is take responsibility for the consequences of his actions for the other person. And it's very obvious in this case, even if he had the best of intentions, and nobody thinks he had the best of intentions, but even if he had the best of intentions, he's had a devastating impact on this young woman's life. I think she's now 19, and at the beginning of this story, she was 16. It's obviously changed her life forever, this really bizarre triangular relationship she was in over so many years, over a crucial time in her life. And of course, a responsible person could have seen that coming, right? In most of our relationships, we cannot see the consequences coming, right? I got married to a fully grown woman with a PhD from Cambridge University, right? And the truth is, I didn't really know who I was falling in love with. I didn't know who I was getting married to. I figured out who she really was over a period of several years. And you know what? The nicest thing, the most charitable thing I can say for her is, probably in some ways at the start of that relationship, she herself didn't really know who she was. Maybe she was concealing some things from me intentionally, but even if we presume that's not true, people may not have it in them to disclose who they are. They may not know what makes them weak or vulnerable, what their strengths and weaknesses are, put it that way. And they also won't know what the impact will be for you emotionally, or even in terms of your job, your career, your life, all kinds of other more palpable effects also. They don't know the way in which their efforts to love you, to be kind to you, to take care of you, they don't know the extent to which that may end up being abusive for you, may end up being destructive towards you. And I think that's the nicest thing, towards Onision at least, anyone this month has ever said.